Ladies and gentlemen, let me open with this truth. Silence in relationships is never empty. It is full of messages, and most of them are screaming what words are too afraid to say. In every bond, whether romantic, family, or friendship, there comes a moment when silence creeps in, and in that stillness many assume peace. But not all quiet is calm. Some silences are loud with pain. Silence is not golden when it becomes a substitute for communication. It is not strength when it hides emotion. It is not growth when it buries conflict. It becomes a mirror, a harsh, reflective surface that reveals the cracks in the foundation of connection. When two people stop talking, it doesn't mean they've run out of things to say. It means they've stopped feeling safe enough to say them. Why does silence hurt more than words? Because it leaves the mind to wander. It creates space for assumptions to take root, for fear to blossom, and for insecurities to thrive. In the absence of dialogue, we script our own stories. And sadly, those stories are often far darker than the truth. Now let me be clear, not all silence is dangerous. There is such a thing as intentional silence, the kind that gives room for reflection, for healing, for self-awareness. But when silence becomes a weapon, when it becomes avoidance, when it's used to punish or disconnect, that is when it becomes toxic. Unspoken words weigh the heaviest. A simple, "I'm hurt," never said. A "please understand me," swallowed. "This matters to me," buried under pride. These unexpressed emotions build walls higher than anger ever could. And those walls don't protect. They isolate. But here's the most shocking truth about silence in relationships. It is not the silence itself that ends the relationship. It's what grows in the silence. Resentment, mistrust, distance, apathy. And yet, most people wait. They wait for the other person to speak first. They wait for the right time. They wait until they've rehearsed the perfect script. And in all that waiting, connection withers. Let me tell you something I've learned from studying success and failure in human relationships. Anything left unattended dies. A relationship is like a garden. Ignore it and weeds grow. Stop speaking and silence grows thorns. If you are the one who feels the silence, be the one who breaks it. If you are the one who caused it, be the one who heals it. And if silence has become your safe place, ask yourself, what am I hiding from? The path back to communication is not paved with comfort. It is paved with courage. It is forged in honesty, clarity, and a fierce desire to reconnect, not to be right. You must summon the boldness to speak, not just to be heard, but to heal. Because the fate of your relationship lies not in the words you say, but in the ones you refuse to. So I ask you, today, not tomorrow, where has silence robbed you of connection? Where has it grown like a shadow over the love, trust, or understanding you once had? Do not let silence become the thief of your future. Do not let it write the final chapter of a story that still has pages left. Break the silence, or it will break you. Silence in the context of a relationship often appears harmless on the surface, just a pause, a moment of peace, a space between words. But if you look deeper, you'll see that silence can reflect far more than tranquility. It reflects something most people try to avoid facing: emotional disconnection. When two people who once shared laughter, vulnerability, and openness suddenly find themselves sitting in long, empty silences, something profound has shifted. That silence isn't stillness, it's a signal. Emotional disconnection doesn't usually erupt in loud arguments or dramatic exits. It starts quietly. It begins when conversations become short, when meaningful eye contact disappears, and when the comfort of sharing thoughts turns into the fear of being misunderstood. Silence becomes the default because speaking feels too risky or too pointless. And slowly, that silence becomes a mirror, one that reveals the growing distance between hearts that used to beat in sync. What's even more alarming is that this kind of silence often hides behind politeness. Everything seems fine. There are no fights, no raised voices, no storms. But deep down, both individuals feel the gap widening. They sense the emotional void, but they hesitate to acknowledge it. They avoid difficult conversations because they fear conflict. They suppress feelings because they think keeping the peace is more important than seeking understanding. And so the silence lingers. It grows. This silence tells you what the words do not. It whispers of unmet emotional needs, unresolved pain, and withheld truth. And the longer it persists, the more it convinces both people that maybe they're just growing apart. But in truth, they're drifting in the same space, disconnected by emotional walls they've silently built together. Many people mistake this silence for maturity. They say, "We don't argue, so we must be okay." But a lack of arguments doesn't equal connection. Sometimes it means apathy has replaced passion. When you no longer care enough to speak, to question, to engage, that's when silence becomes most dangerous. But it doesn't have to be the end. The silence can also be a turning point. If you're willing to look into that mirror and truly see what's being reflected, you have a choice. You can start the uncomfortable conversation. You can ask, "Are we okay?" You can say, "I feel distant and I want to understand why." It takes courage to speak into silence, to reach out when it feels easier to withdraw. The truth is, silence in a relationship is not about the absence of sound. It's about the absence of connection. It reveals the distance that has grown not between bodies, but between souls. And the only way to close that distance is through intentional, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable communication. Because what you leave unsaid in silence becomes the weight that pulls love under. Silence in a relationship may seem like a quiet space, but within that space, the mind begins to speak louder than ever. When communication fades, assumptions begin to fill the void. One unanswered message becomes, "They don't care." One missed call becomes, "They're avoiding me." One distant look becomes, "Something's wrong with me." The silence that might have started out of fatigue or confusion quickly transforms into a breeding ground for doubt, fear, and insecurity. Human beings are wired for connection and understanding. We search for patterns, meanings, and reassurance in our interactions. When communication stops or becomes inconsistent, the brain doesn't rest. It starts creating its own conclusions. And more often than not, those conclusions aren't positive. They are filled with worry and self-blame, especially when the silence comes from someone we care about deeply. In relationships, emotional safety comes from clarity. It comes from open, even imperfect, communication. When we know where we stand, even if the truth is difficult, we can find stability. But when we're left in the dark, the mind becomes restless. It asks questions that go unanswered. Did I do something wrong? Are they upset? Is this the beginning of the end? And that constant guessing game slowly erodes confidence, not only in the relationship, but also in oneself. Insecurity doesn't grow overnight. It develops from repeated moments of silence where assurance was needed, but never received. Each time we reach out and hear nothing, or express ourselves and feel unheard, a seed of doubt is planted. Over time, those seeds become walls, walls that block love, connection, and trust. Silence becomes the silent killer of confidence, the quiet destroyer of intimacy. What's even more challenging is that silence is often unintentional. One partner might be retreating to process their emotions, thinking they're protecting the relationship from conflict. But the other person experiences that retreat as rejection. The gap widens because no one speaks their truth. And in that space, assumptions start to appear more believable than reality. This misalignment can cause even the most loving relationship to fall into confusion and pain. The truth is, assumptions are dangerous because they are invisible. You don't always know you're making them. You just start reacting, getting defensive, withdrawing, or feeling anxious. And the other person, seeing those changes in your behavior, starts to make their own assumptions. It becomes a loop of misunderstanding, all sparked by a simple lack of open communication. But this pattern can be broken. It starts by recognizing that silence is not neutral. It has meaning, and it has impact. If you're the one going silent, ask yourself, am I leaving room for confusion and pain? If you're on the receiving end of silence, consider speaking up with honesty and grace. Express how the silence makes you feel, not to accuse, but to reconnect. In relationships, clarity is kindness. A single, sincere conversation can prevent 1,000 anxious thoughts. When we replace silence with honest words, we replace fear with understanding. And when we choose communication over assumptions, We create space for security, love, and mutual respect to grow again. Silence in a relationship can be both healing or harmful. It all depends on the intention behind it. There's a powerful difference between the kind of silence that offers space for growth and reflection and the kind of silence that creates distance, confusion, and emotional pain. Many people make the mistake of treating all silence the same, but when you look closer, you'll see that intentional silence and neglectful silence have completely opposite energies. Intentional silence is a mature pause. It's chosen, not forced. It arises from a conscious need to step back, reflect, and gather thoughts before speaking. It's often used to prevent conflict, to process overwhelming emotions, or to allow time for understanding to settle in. In this form, silence is not avoidance, it's respect. It says, I care enough to not react impulsively. It provides room to breathe, to calm down, and to come back with more clarity and love. In a healthy relationship, both people understand this kind of silence, and they trust that it's temporary, purposeful, and ultimately productive. Neglectful silence, on the other hand, is careless and often cruel. It's when one person emotionally checks out, shuts down, or withholds communication as a way to avoid accountability or connection. This kind of silence leaves the other person feeling abandoned, invisible, and unimportant. It creates a cold vacuum where love once lived. Unlike intentional silence, which invites healing, neglectful silence introduces doubt. It doesn't solve problems. It multiplies them. It doesn't promote peace. It breeds distance. The real danger lies in the fact that neglectful silence is often disguised as space, but the energy feels different. One leaves you feeling understood, even if nothing is said. The other leaves you questioning your worth. One promotes a return to healthy conversation. The other makes you feel like you're chasing someone who no longer wants to be caught. When silence is used as a tool to avoid confrontation, to delay difficult conversations, or to punish someone, it becomes emotionally manipulative. It's not just about the absence of words. It's about the message being sent through that absence. And often that message is loud and clear. You're not worth my words. This is why it's crucial to be honest about your intentions when you choose silence. Are you taking time to reflect and come back stronger? Or are you using silence to withdraw, escape, or create power over someone else? In relationships built on trust, intentional silence can strengthen the bond. But in relationships already hanging by a thread, neglectful silence can be the final break. Healthy relationships require balance. It's okay to take a moment to pause before speaking, but that pause must be followed by presence. Communication is not just about talking, it's about staying emotionally available, even in difficult times. If you must be silent, let your partner know why. Reassure them that your silence isn't a wall, but a door you're temporarily closing to gather strength. The truth is, silence isn't always the enemy, but silence with poor intent is. It's not the silence itself that harms the relationship, it's what it represents. In every quiet moment, ask yourself, am I creating space for connection to return, or am I creating a gap that pushes us further apart? In relationships, it's often not what's said that hurts the most, it's what's left unsaid. The unspoken words, the withheld emotions, the truths buried under fear or pride, carry a weight that quietly presses down on the connection between two people. These silent thoughts and feelings don't disappear simply because they aren't voiced. Instead, they accumulate. They live in the mind, in the heart, and in the energy exchanged between people. And over time, they begin to shape the dynamic of the relationship, often without either person fully realizing it. There are moments when someone wants to say, I'm hurt, but the fear of being misunderstood silences them. There are times when someone wants to say, I miss you, or I'm scared, or I need more from you, but vulnerability feels too risky, so they say nothing. And that nothing begins to echo louder than any spoken sentence ever could. Silence becomes a language of its own, but it's one filled with uncertainty, assumptions, and unresolved tension. Unspoken words create a silent pressure. They become the what ifs that linger long after conversations have ended. They turn into imaginary arguments, emotional distance, and inner dialogues that spiral into anxiety or resentment. When people hold back what they truly feel, they often believe they're protecting the relationship from conflict. But in reality, they're building a barrier to intimacy. Real connection doesn't happen in perfect agreement. It happens in honest expression. Sometimes silence is a defense mechanism. People are taught not to rock the boat, to avoid discomfort, to suppress rather than confront. But in doing so, they pay the price of emotional suppression. The unsaid accumulates like emotional debt, and like any debt, it demands to be paid, with interest. It shows up in withdrawal, mood swings, loss of affection, or a complete emotional shutdown. Unspoken words can also leave the other person confused, trying to decode behavior without a map. They sense something's wrong but don't know what. They feel the distance but don't understand why. In that space, misunderstandings grow. Trust begins to waver, not because of betrayal, but because of silence. The absence of words becomes the absence of clarity, reassurance, and emotional safety. Speaking up is not always easy. It requires courage, especially when emotions are high or when past experiences have taught someone that vulnerability can lead to pain. But choosing to speak, even imperfectly, is a gift to the relationship. It creates space for understanding. It gives both people a chance to respond with empathy rather than assumption. It invites healing growth and a deeper connection. The truth is, words left unspoken today often become regrets tomorrow. Don't wait until silence has turned into a wall that can no longer be climbed. Don't wait until your heart is so full of unexpressed emotion that it begins to shut down. Speak your truth, not to argue, but to be seen. Not to control, but to connect. Silence in a relationship is often misunderstood. Many see it as the end, the moment when things have finally fallen apart. But silence is rarely the conclusion. It's a signal. It's a signpost that something important is happening beneath the surface. It's the emotional equivalent of a flashing light on the dashboard. It doesn't mean the engine has failed. It means attention is urgently needed. When silence appears, it often marks a turning point. It can show up after a disagreement when emotions are too raw to be processed. It can arrive during moments of stress or distance, when the connection feels strained. But what matters most is not the silence itself, it's what we do when it arrives. Do we pause and reflect? Do we avoid and withdraw? Or do we lean in with curiosity and courage to understand what it's trying to show us? Silence is a space where truth tries to surface. It may be the truth that someone feels neglected, unheard, overwhelmed, or misunderstood. It may signal the presence of unresolved wounds or unmet emotional needs. In this way, silence is not trying to punish. It's trying to direct. It's pointing toward an issue that needs healing, a conversation that's long overdue, or a shift in the dynamic that can no longer be ignored. The problem arises when silence is mistaken for stability or normalcy. When people stop talking, they often tell themselves, "At least we're not fighting." But silence isn't always peace. In many cases, it's resignation. It's the moment when someone gives up trying to be understood. It's when effort is replaced with quiet detachment. Left unchecked, silence transforms from a signal into a shield, and that shield pushes people further apart. We must understand that silence is not the final word. It's the space between pages, not the closing of the book. When viewed with awareness, it becomes a valuable moment to recalibrate, to notice what hasn't been said, to examine how we've been showing up for each other, to ask, what are we avoiding, and what truth is hiding in this quiet? But recognizing silence as a signpost requires emotional maturity. It demands that we resist the urge to fill the silence with distractions, defensiveness, or blame. It calls for vulnerability, the willingness to say, "This silence feels heavy. Let's talk about what it means." Only then can we transform it into a doorway for deeper understanding. Ignoring silence or accepting it as the new normal is like ignoring a detour sign on the road. You may keep moving, but you're headed in the wrong direction. Eventually, the damage becomes harder to undo. But if we listen to what the silence is pointing to, if we treat it as a moment of choice, we gain the power to change the outcome. In every relationship, silence will show up at some point, but its presence is not a punishment. It's an invitation to pause, reflect, and reconnect. It offers the chance to shift the direction before things drift too far apart. When we start treating silence not as a dead end, but as a meaningful message, we reclaim the ability to respond with intention. Rebuilding communication in a relationship is not an act of comfort. It is an act of courage. It's easier to stay quiet, to suppress the truth, to keep things on the surface where they feel safe and predictable. But healing progress and real connection do not grow in comfort zones. They grow in the vulnerable, uncertain, and often uncomfortable spaces where honesty meets intention. When communication has broken down, it takes tremendous bravery to begin again. To speak when it's easier to stay silent, to listen when it's tempting to defend, to lean in when it would be safer to walk away. Courage is required because rebuilding communication means stepping into emotional risk. It means saying, "This is how I feel," without knowing how the other person will respond. It means being open to their truth, even if it's hard to hear. It means asking the hard questions like, "Where did we lose each other?" Or, "What do you need from me that I haven't given?" These are not questions rooted in blame. They are born from a desire to rebuild, not just the flow of words, but the trust beneath them. The journey back to healthy communication is not a straight path. There will be moments of misunderstanding, discomfort, and resistance. Old patterns will try to resurface: silence, defensiveness, avoidance. But each time you choose to speak instead of shut down, to clarify instead of assume, to stay present instead of withdraw, you are rebuilding brick by brick the foundation of connection. This courage is not loud or dramatic. It's often quiet and steady. It shows up in small, consistent efforts. It's found in the moment you choose to ask, "How are you really feeling?" even if you fear the answer. It's found in the choice to apologize sincerely or to express appreciation instead of taking the relationship for granted. These simple acts, done with intention, begin to reestablish a sense of safety. And without emotional safety, communication will always remain fragile. What many people forget is that communication is not just about speaking clearly. It's about making the other person feel safe enough to respond honestly. You can't rebuild a bridge if one side feels attacked or unheard. Rebuilding requires patience, empathy, and the willingness to understand rather than win. It's not about having the perfect words. It's about having the heart to try again, to repair rather than retreat. It's natural to want comfort, to wish that communication could just flow like it used to. But comfort doesn't rebuild broken bonds. Courage does. And the greatest courage often lies in the willingness to be real, to show up with your flaws and fears, to say, "I want this to work, and I'm willing to do the hard work it takes." That kind of vulnerability is not weakness. It's the highest form of strength. In the end, communication is not a skill that fades. It's a bridge that can always be rebuilt, but only if both people are willing to walk across it. Not with the guarantee that everything will be easy, but with the commitment that the connection is worth the effort. If you can find the courage to begin again, to face the discomfort, to lean into truth, you give the relationship a fighting chance to grow into something stronger, wiser, and more resilient than before. In every relationship, silence speaks, but what it says depends on how we listen and how we respond. We've explored how silence can mirror emotional disconnection, how it breeds insecurity and assumptions, and how unspoken words quietly weigh down even the strongest bonds. We've uncovered the difference between intentional and neglectful silence, and how one heals while the other harms. We've seen that silence is not the destination, but a signpost guiding us toward what needs attention. And perhaps most importantly, we've learned that rebuilding communication doesn't come from comfort. It comes from courage. If there is a single truth to carry forward, it is this: silence is never meaningless. In love, in friendship, in family, when words fade, emotions still echo. The solution is not in avoiding silence, but in facing it with awareness and strength. Healing begins when we choose to replace confusion with clarity, distance with honesty, and assumptions with understanding. So if you find yourself standing in the silence right now, don't turn away. Step into it. Ask what it's trying to show you. Speak even when your voice trembles. Listen even when the words are hard. Because relationships thrive not in the absence of conflict, but in the presence of consistent, heartfelt communication. The truth is, silence doesn't end relationships. Our refusal to address it does. But if you're willing to face the silence with empathy and truth, then what seems like the end could actually become the beginning of something deeper, more meaningful, and truly unbreakable.